The frozen morning air bit at Marlowe's skin as she opened the front door, her hands trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of another day she didn't know how to face. There, on the weathered wooden step, sat the brown paper bag and glass bottle that had appeared every dawn since Jonah died. No footprints in the frost, no note, no explanation, just bread and milk, delivered by a ghost she couldn't name. As her children stirred behind her, hungry and unaware, Marlowe clutched the bag tighter and felt the shame burn deeper than gratitude ever could. Before we dive into Marlowe's story, if you're enjoying this emotional journey, please subscribe to our channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers to keep bringing you powerful stories like this one. Your support means everything. The sun hadn't yet broken over the Idaho horizon when Marlowe Hayes pushed open her front door. The hinges groaned, a sound that had become part of her morning routine, along with the ache in her chest that never quite went away. 3 months. It had been 3 months since Jonah's truck rolled off Highway 33 in a rainstorm that turned the asphalt into glass. 3 months since the sheriff knocked on her door with his hat in his hands, and words she still couldn't fully accept. 3 months of waking up to an empty bed, and a future that felt like staring into fog. But the deliveries, those started the very next morning. Marlowe bent down and picked up the brown paper bag, feeling its warmth seep through to her fingertips. Inside, she knew without looking, artisan bread with a golden crust that crackled when you broke it, and a glass bottle of milk so fresh it still had tiny bubbles clinging to the sides. No label, no receipt, no explanation. She glanced down the long dirt driveway that stretched toward the main road, scanning for tire tracks or footprints. Nothing. Just the pale light of dawn stretching across empty fields and the distant silhouette of pine trees standing like silent witnesses. "Mama?" Ilara's voice drifted from inside the house, soft and careful. At 6 years old, she had learned to measure her mother's moods before fully entering a room. Marlowe straightened, forcing her face into something that resembled calm. "I'm here, sweetheart." Ilara appeared in the doorway, her dark hair tangled from sleep, Jonah's brown eyes staring out from a face too young to carry such careful observation. Behind her, Finnick stumbled forward, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. "Is it there again?" Ilara asked, her gaze dropping to the bag in Marlowe's hands. "Yes." "Who brings it?" Marlowe had no answer. She never did. "Someone kind," she finally said, stepping back inside and closing the door against the morning chill. The kitchen was small, just enough room for a worn table, 4 mismatched chairs, and appliances that had seen better decades. Marlowe set the bag on the counter and began slicing the bread while Ilara poured milk into 2 plastic cups decorated with fading cartoon characters. Finnick climbed onto his chair and kicked his legs, watching his mother with the kind of trust that made her chest tighten. He didn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home. He just knew that Mama looked tired now, all the time. "I'm going to find out who it is," Ilara announced suddenly, her voice carrying that determined edge she got when she'd made up her mind about something. Marlowe paused mid-slice. "Ilara, I'm going to stay up one night and watch through the window. Then we'll know." "You need your sleep for school. But don't you want to know?" Ilara's eyes searched her mother's face, looking for something Marlowe wasn't sure she could give. The truth was complicated. Yes, she wanted to know. The mystery gnawed at her during long nights when sleep wouldn't come, and the house felt too quiet. But more than curiosity, she felt something darker. Shame that coiled in her stomach every time she accepted the bag. Shame that she needed help. Shame that she couldn't provide for her children without some anonymous benefactor taking pity on the poor widow Hayes. "Eat your breakfast," Marlowe said, her voice firmer than she intended. Ilara's face fell, but she obeyed, chewing her bread in silence, while Finnick hummed a tuneless song and swung his rabbit by its remaining ear. After breakfast, Marlowe dropped the children at the small elementary school 7 miles down the road, then drove her aging sedan toward the Brennan farm where she cleaned twice a week. The work was hard, scrubbing floors, washing windows, laundering sheets that smelled of livestock and hard labor. But Mrs. Brennan paid cash and didn't ask questions about Marlowe's red-rimmed eyes or the way her hands sometimes shook when she thought no one was watching. By the time she returned home that afternoon, exhaustion had settled into her bones like an old friend. She picked up Ilara and Finnick, listened to Finnick's excited chatter about the frog he'd seen at recess, and pretended not to notice how quiet Ilara had become. That evening, after the children were asleep, Marlowe stood at the kitchen window and stared out at the darkness. Somewhere beyond those fields, someone knew her situation. Someone watched. Someone cared enough to make sure her children had bread and milk every morning. But who? And more importantly, why? The questions followed her to bed, where she lay awake until the small hours, listening to the house settle and creak around her. Tomorrow morning, the bag would be there again. It always was. Like clockwork. Like a promise she never asked for but desperately needed. Who is the mysterious benefactor leaving food at Marlowe's door every morning? And what connection could they possibly have to her late husband, Jonah? The answers will begin to surface in ways Marlowe never expected. The rhythm of Marlowe's life had become a series of careful calculations. How many hours could she work without collapsing? How many potatoes could stretch across 3 dinners? How long could she ignore the overdue notice from the electric company before the lights actually went out? Every morning, the bag appeared. Every morning, she took it inside with fingers that trembled between gratitude and humiliation. By the 4th week, she'd stopped looking for clues. Whoever was doing this had perfected the art of invisibility. No tire tracks, no footprints. No witnesses among the scattered neighbors whose homes dotted the rural landscape like islands in an ocean of emptiness. Marlowe added 2 more cleaning jobs to her schedule, the Hendersons on Tuesday afternoons and the Yates family on Thursday mornings. Her back ached constantly now, a dull throb that radiated from her spine to her shoulders. She swallowed aspirin like candy and kept moving, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant drowning. One afternoon, while scrubbing the Hendersons' bathroom floor, she overheard Mrs. Henderson talking to her sister on the phone. "Poor thing," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice carrying through the thin walls. "Jonah left her with nothing but debt and 2 babies to feed. I heard she can barely keep the lights on." Marlowe's hand froze on the sponge, soap suds dripping between her fingers. "Oh, I know. Such a shame. Pretty girl, too. She'll probably have to sell that property and move into town. Can't imagine trying to maintain a house like that on a cleaning woman's wages." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward, until Marlowe felt them in her chest. She scrubbed harder, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, but apparently it was the only thing she had left. That evening, as she prepared dinner, canned soup stretched with crackers, Ilara sat at the table with her homework spread out before her. "Mama?" Ilara's voice was hesitant. "Why doesn't anyone else get bread and milk at their door?" Marlowe's hand stilled over the pot. "What do you mean?" "I asked Emma at school. She said nobody brings food to her house, and Tyler said his mom buys everything at the store." Ilara's eyes were too knowing, too observant. "Why is someone bringing it to us?" Finnick looked up from his coloring book, suddenly interested. Marlowe forced herself to breathe steadily. "Sometimes, when people go through hard times, others help out. It's just kindness, sweetheart. But you don't know who it is?" "No." "Doesn't that seem weird?" It seemed more than weird. It seemed deliberate, calculated. Like whoever was doing this understood that Marlowe would never accept help if she knew where it came from. Like they knew her well enough to anticipate her pride and work around it. "Eat your soup," Marlowe said quietly. The following Sunday, Marlowe drove into town for groceries, or rather the few groceries she could afford after paying the water bill. The small downtown consisted of a general store, a diner, a hardware shop, and a bakery that had opened 2 years ago, bringing the scent of fresh bread and the promise of something better than the pre-sliced loaves from the supermarket chain in the next county. Marlowe rarely went to the bakery. Artisan bread was a luxury for people with stable incomes and retirement funds. But as she passed, something made her stop. Through the window, she could see the baker arranging loaves in the display case. The golden crusts, the rustic shapes, they looked exactly like the bread that appeared on her doorstep. Her heart began to pound. She pushed open the door, the bell chiming overhead. The warm, yeast-scented air enveloped her immediately. "Can I help you?" The baker was a middle-aged woman with flour dusting her apron and kindness in her eyes. "That bread," Marlowe said, pointing to a loaf that could have been the twin of this morning's delivery. Where does it go? I mean, who buys it? The woman's smile faltered slightly. Well, lots of folks. We deliver to several households and... Do you deliver to rural addresses? Early morning deliveries? The baker's expression shifted, becoming careful. We do have some standing orders, yes. Who pays for them? I'm sorry, ma'am, but that's private customer information. Marlowe felt frustration rising in her throat. Please, I need to know. The woman studied her for a long moment, then sighed. I can't give you names, but I can tell you that someone prepaid for a year's worth of deliveries to your address, bread and milk, every morning, no exceptions. A year. Whoever was doing this had committed to a full year of watching over her family. When? Marlowe's voice was barely a whisper. When was it arranged? 3 months ago, right after the accident was in the papers. The timeline made Marlowe's stomach twist. Someone had started this the moment Jonah died. Not days later, not weeks later, immediately. The milk, she pressed. Where does that come from? Cloverfield Farm supplies it. That's about 15 miles north of here. Marlowe knew the name. Everyone in the county knew Cloverfield. It was one of the largest operations in the region, successful enough to supply dairy products to stores across 3 counties. She left the bakery with more questions than answers, her mind spinning through possibilities. Someone with money, someone with connections to both the bakery and Cloverfield Farm, someone who knew exactly when Jonah had died. That night, after tucking Alara and Finnick into bed, Marlowe pulled out the old cardboard box she'd shoved into the back of the bedroom closet. Jonah's papers, bills, receipts, random notes he'd scribbled and never thrown away. She'd avoided looking through it, afraid of what she might find, or worse, afraid of what she wouldn't find. Afraid that Jonah's life would be reduced to a pile of meaningless documents that proved he'd existed and then stopped. But now, with the mystery of the deliveries pressing against her ribs like a physical weight, she needed answers. She dumped the contents onto the bed and began sorting. Electric bills, truck maintenance records, a birthday card she'd given him 2 years ago that he'd kept for some reason. Then, near the bottom, something that made her breath catch, a contract, unsigned. And beneath it, a handwritten note on a scrap of paper. Clayton Rowe, 12K, no interest, repay when able. Clayton Rowe. The name echoed in her memory like a distant bell. Jonah had mentioned it once, maybe twice, always in passing, always with a strange tone she couldn't quite read. Not anger, exactly, but something close to it, something complicated. Marlowe stared at the papers until her vision blurred, trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. $12,000. No interest. Repay when able. What had Jonah been involved in? And what did Clayton Rowe have to do with the bread and milk that kept appearing at her door? Marlowe has discovered a name from her husband's past. Clayton Rowe. But who is he? And what connection did he have to Jonah? The truth waiting in the shadows might change everything she thought she knew about the man she married. Sleep became impossible. Marlowe lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the name burning in her mind like a brand. Clayton Rowe. She turned it over and over, searching her memory for context, for meaning, for anything that would explain the note hidden among Jonah's papers. The next morning, she asked Mrs. Brennan about him while folding laundry. Clayton Rowe. Mrs. Brennan's eyebrows lifted. You mean from Cloverfield Farm? Yes. Well, he's quite successful now. Keeps to himself mostly. Lost his wife years ago. Cancer, I think. No children. Just him and that massive operation he built from nothing. Mrs. Brennan shook out a pillowcase with practiced efficiency. Why do you ask? Marlowe chose her words carefully. I found his name in some of Jonah's papers. I was just curious. Mrs. Brennan's expression shifted, becoming thoughtful. You know, I do remember hearing something years back. Before Cloverfield became what it is today, Rowe was struggling, almost lost everything. Then suddenly things turned around. She paused, folding a sheet into precise squares. People say someone helped him, gave him a loan when the banks wouldn't, but Rowe never said who. The information settled over Marlowe like cold water. Jonah. It had been Jonah. If you're invested in discovering the truth alongside Marlowe, please hit that subscribe button. We need your support to reach 1,000 subscribers and continue bringing you stories that touch the heart. Thank you for being part of this journey. That afternoon, Marlowe made a decision that terrified her. She would go to Cloverfield Farm. She would confront Clayton Rowe. She would demand answers about the note, about the loan, about whether he was the one leaving bread and milk at her door like some kind of guardian angel she never asked for. The drive north took longer than she expected. The road wound through farmland that gradually transformed from modest plots to sprawling operations with modern equipment and pristine fencing. Cloverfield Farm announced itself with a wooden sign carved with elegant lettering, and beyond it stretched acres of green pastures dotted with black and white dairy cows. The main house sat at the end of a long driveway, a two-story structure that managed to look both practical and prosperous. Barns and outbuildings spread behind it in organized efficiency, and everywhere Marlowe looked, she saw the evidence of success: new equipment, fresh paint, healthy livestock. This was built with Jonah's money, she thought, and the realization made her hands tighten on the steering wheel. She parked near the house and sat for a moment, gathering courage. Through the windshield, she could see a man emerging from one of the barns, tall, maybe mid-50s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of outdoor work. Clayton Rowe. She knew it instinctively. Marlowe stepped out of the car and the man stopped walking. For a long moment they simply stared at each other across the distance. Then he approached slowly, his boots crunching on gravel. "Mrs. Hayes?" His voice was deep and measured, not a question, a statement. "You know who I am." "I do." Up close, she could see the lines etched around his eyes, the grey stubble on his jaw, the calluses on his hands. He looked like a man who'd built something through sweat and sacrifice. He also looked like a man carrying weight. "Why?" The word burst from Marlowe before she could plan what to say. "Why are you doing this?" Clayton's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I think we should talk inside. I want answers, now. And I'll give them to you, but not standing in my driveway where anyone driving past can see." His tone wasn't unkind, just firm. "Please, come inside." Every instinct told Marlowe to refuse, to demand he explain himself right here, right now. But the steadiness in his gaze made her hesitate. This wasn't a man trying to hide. This was a man trying to do right by something. She followed him into the house. The interior was neat but sparse. Functional furniture, clean surfaces, photos on the mantel showing a younger Clayton with a dark-haired woman whose smile reached her eyes. His late wife, Marlowe assumed. No clutter, no excess, just the essentials of a life lived alone. Clayton gestured to the kitchen table. "Coffee?" "No." "Just answers." He nodded and sat down across from her, his hands folded on the worn wood. For a moment he said nothing, as if choosing his words with the same care he probably used to run his farm. "Jonah saved my life," he finally said. "Not literally, but close enough." Marlowe waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. 8 years ago I was drowning. My wife was sick, treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, medical bills stacking higher than I could climb. The farm was failing. I'd taken out loans from every bank that would have me, and when they all said no to more, I had nowhere left to turn. Clayton's voice remained steady, but his eyes held old pain. I was going to lose everything: the farm, the house, any chance of paying for Sarah's care. I was going to lose her and everything we'd built all at once. And Jonah helped you. He did more than help. He handed me $12,000 in cash and told me to repay it when I could. No interest, no contract, no timeline. Just trust. Clayton looked down at his hands. I asked him why. Why would he do this for someone he barely knew? We'd met maybe twice at community events. We weren't friends. What did he say? He said, "Because someone helped me once when I needed it, and I'm just passing it forward. The only condition is that someday when you're able, you do the same for someone else." The words hit Marlowe like a physical blow, That sounded exactly like Jonah, the man who'd stopped to help stranded motorists, who'd fix neighbors' fences without being asked, who believed in the fundamental goodness of people, even when the world gave him reasons not to. I tried to pay him back, Clayton continued. As soon as the farm started turning around, as soon as I had profits instead of losses, I went to see him. Multiple times. He always refused. Said he didn't need the money. Told me to invest it back into the farm or save it for my future. The last time I tried was about 6 months before the accident. Marlowe's throat tightened. He never told me. I got the impression he didn't tell anyone. That was the kind of man he was. Helped people without needing credit for it. The kitchen felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. Marlowe stood and walked to the window, staring out at the prosperous farm that Jonah's kindness had helped save. "The bread and milk," she said quietly. "That's you." "Yes. Why?" "Because I owed him, because he made me promise to pass it forward, because when I heard about the accident, I knew his family would be struggling, and I couldn't stand by and do nothing." Marlowe turned to face him, tears burning behind her eyes. "I don't want charity. It's not charity, it's a debt being repaid. A debt he forgave. Maybe." Clayton stood as well, his expression gentle but unwavering. "But I didn't forgive it. And more than that, I made him a promise, the same promise he'd extracted from me when he gave me the money, that I'd help someone who needed it when the time came. His family is that someone." The logic was circular, infuriating, and somehow perfectly in line with what Jonah would have wanted. Marlowe felt anger and gratitude warring inside her, neither emotion quite winning. "I can take care of my children." "I'm sure you can, but you shouldn't have to do it alone. Not when there's help available. Not when your husband's kindness created a chain of goodness that shouldn't end just because he's gone." Marlowe's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of this stranger who somehow knew her husband better than she'd realized. "How long?" she whispered. "How long were you planning to do this?" Clayton met her eyes steadily. "As long as you need it." Clayton Rowe has revealed himself as Marlowe's mysterious benefactor, but his connection to Jonah runs deeper than a simple loan. What other secrets did Jonah keep, and how far does Clayton's promise truly extend? Marlowe drove home in a daze, her hands gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. The conversation with Clayton replayed in her mind like a recording she couldn't pause. Every word, every expression, every revelation about the husband she thought she'd known completely. How many other secrets had Jonah kept? How many other lives had he touched without her knowledge? When she picked up Ilara and Finnick from school, she barely heard their chatter about playground games and art projects. Her mind was miles away, circling the same questions over and over. That evening, after the children were asleep, Marlowe returned to Jonah's box of papers. She went through every document with new eyes, searching for other clues, other names, other evidence of the man her husband had been when she wasn't watching. She found receipts for donations to the food bank, a thank you note from a family whose barn had burned down. Jonah had apparently organized a community rebuild, a birthday card from an elderly neighbor thanking him for fixing her roof before winter came. Small kindnesses, quiet generosities, a pattern of helping without fanfare. Marlowe pressed her palm against her chest, feeling her heart ache with a mixture of pride and loss so intense it was difficult to breathe. She'd loved Jonah, but she was discovering she hadn't fully known him. He'd been better than she realized, and now he was gone before she could tell him she understood. 3 days passed before Clayton appeared at her door. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the yard. Marlowe was hanging laundry on the line, sheets that smelled like cheap detergent and hard work, when she heard the truck pull up. She turned, shading her eyes against the light, and saw Clayton stepping out of a well-maintained pickup. "Mrs. Hayes." He approached carefully, as if aware he might not be welcome. "Mr. Rowe." Her voice was neutral, guarded. "I wanted to apologize if I upset you the other day. That wasn't my intention." Marlowe hung another sheet, the fabric snapping in the breeze. You didn't upset me, you just complicated things." "I understand." He stood there awkwardly for a moment, clearly wrestling with something. "There's more I need to tell you. Things I didn't mention before because I wasn't sure if you were ready to hear them. Marlowe's hands stilled on the clothespin. What things? The loan wasn't just about saving the farm. It was about saving my wife. Clayton's voice roughened. Sarah had 6 more months because of that money. 6 months of treatments, of time together, of being able to say everything that needed saying. She died knowing I'd done everything possible, that I hadn't given up on her. The words landed like stones in deep water. Marlowe lowered her hands slowly, turning to face him fully. When she passed, Clayton continued, I went to Jonah again, told him I wanted to repay the loan as a tribute to Sarah's memory. You know what he said? Marlowe shook her head. He said, the best tribute to your wife is to live well and help others the way you've been helped. That's how we honor the people we've lost, by becoming the kind of people they'd be proud to know. Tears spilled down Marlowe's cheeks before she could stop them. That was Jonah. That was exactly how he would have thought about death and legacy, and the purpose of continuing forward. Clayton looked away, giving her a moment of privacy. I'm not trying to make this harder for you, but I wanted you to understand. This isn't pity. This is me trying to be the man your husband believed I could be. Why didn't he ever tell me? Marlowe's voice broke. Why did he keep all of this to himself? Maybe he thought it didn't need telling. Maybe he believed actions mattered more than recognition. Clayton pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and held it out. I found this among my own papers. It's from Jonah. He gave it to me about a year ago and told me only to read it if something happened to him. Marlowe's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Jonah's handwriting sprawled across the front. For Clayton, if needed. I read it the day after the accident, Clayton said quietly. It changed everything I thought I understood about obligation and friendship. Marlowe's fingers traced the familiar loops and angles of her husband's writing. What does it say? It's not for me to tell, but it explains a lot. About why he did what he did. About what he wanted for you and the children. Clayton stepped back toward his truck. Read it when you're ready. And Mrs. Hayes, everything I've done, the bread, the milk, all of it, it was his idea, his plan. I'm just following through on what he set in motion before he died. The words struck Marlowe like lightning. What do you mean, his plan? But Clayton was already climbing into his truck. Read the letter, he called through the open window. Then we'll talk again if you want to. He drove away, leaving Marlowe standing in the yard with laundry half hung and an envelope that suddenly felt heavier than anything she'd ever held. She waited until the children were in bed, until the house was silent except for the familiar creaks and sighs of old wood settling. Then she sat at the kitchen table, turned on the overhead light, and opened the envelope with shaking hands. The letter inside was dated 8 months before Jonah's death. His handwriting filled 2 pages, and just seeing it made Marlowe's vision blur. Clayton, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I live to be 90 and die in my sleep surrounded by grandchildren I haven't met yet. But life doesn't always give us what we hope for, and I believe in being prepared. You remember when I gave you that loan? You thanked me 100 times, but you never understood why I really did it. It wasn't generosity, it was selfishness. See, my father died when I was 17, heart attack, sudden and mean. He left my mother and me with nothing. No insurance, no savings, debt up to our eyeballs. We would have lost everything if a man named Richard Calloway hadn't stepped in, paid off our debts, kept the roof over our heads, asked for nothing in return. I asked him why once. He said, because someone did it for me and this is how I pay it back, by passing it forward. He made me promise that when I was able, I'd do the same for someone else. That's what I did for you, Clayton. I was keeping a promise to a dead man who saved my family. Now I'm asking you to keep that promise going. If something happens to me, Marlowe and the kids are going to struggle. She's proud, too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to accept charity. But she'll need it whether she admits it or not. I've set aside some money with my lawyer, not much but enough to cover deliveries of bread and milk for a year. I've also included instructions for other things, ways to help without making it obvious. Marlowe needs to believe she's standing on her own, but she needs foundation beneath her feet while she figures out how to do it. I'm not asking you to save them. I'm asking you to help them save themselves. There's a difference. The money I gave you. Consider it paid back by taking care of my family, not with grand gestures that embarrass her, but with quiet support that gives her room to breathe and find her strength. She's stronger than she knows, but she's going to need time to discover that. This is how the chain continues, Clayton. This is how we honor the people who helped us by becoming the help someone else needs. Thank you for keeping this promise. Thank you for being the kind of man who understands what it means to receive grace and pass it on. Your friend, Jonah. Marlowe read the letter 3 times, each pass bringing fresh tears and new understanding. Jonah had known. He'd known she would struggle. He'd known she would be too proud to ask for help. He'd known she would need someone watching over her, even as she fought to prove she didn't. And he'd arranged it all before dying, setting pieces in motion like a chess player thinking moves ahead. The bread and milk weren't just Clayton's debt being repaid. They were Jonah's final act of love, a way to care for his family even from beyond death. Marlowe folded the letter carefully, pressed it against her heart, and finally let herself cry the way she'd needed to since the sheriff knocked on her door 3 months ago. She cried for the husband who'd loved her enough to plan for her future without him. She cried for the kindness of strangers who became guardian angels. She cried for the weight she'd been carrying alone, and for the realization that she'd never actually been alone at all. Jonah had made sure of that. Jonah's letter has revealed a truth that changes everything Marlowe thought she understood about her husband's death and Clayton's generosity. But what other provisions did Jonah make, and how deep does this chain of kindness truly run? Morning came with a clarity Marlowe hadn't felt in months. She woke before dawn, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table rereading Jonah's letter as pale light crept through the windows. Every word felt like a gift she was unwrapping slowly, carefully, memorizing the shape and weight of each revelation. When the knock came at her door, she already knew who it would be. Clayton stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking uncertain in a way that reminded her he was just a man trying to honor a promise, not a savior, not a stranger imposing charity, just someone keeping his word. "Come in," Marlowe said before he could speak. They sat across from each other at the same table where she'd read Jonah's letter hours before. The morning light painted everything in shades of gold and shadow. "I read it," Marlowe said simply. Clayton nodded, his weathered hands resting on the table. "Then you understand." "I understand that my husband was more prepared for his death than I was for his life." Her voice caught, but held. "I understand that he knew me well enough to predict exactly how I'd react, and I understand that you've been following instructions he left behind." Not just instructions, a promise. Clayton leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Hayes, Marlowe, there's more. Things Jonah arranged beyond the bread and milk." Marlowe's chest tightened. "What things?" "He met with a lawyer 6 months before the accident, set up what he called a quiet trust. Nothing formal that would trigger notifications or require your signature. Just provisions." "What kind of provisions?" Clayton pulled papers from his jacket and spread them on the table. "The bread and milk were just the beginning, a way to make sure you and the children had daily necessities without drawing attention. But Jonah also arranged for other things. Payments toward your mortgage, routed through my farm's accounts so they'd look like rental income from land use. Funds set aside for the children's education, held by his lawyer until they're needed. Medical insurance premiums covered for 2 years through a rural farmers' cooperative that Jonah paid into." Marlowe stared at the documents, her vision swimming. Rental income, education funds, insurance. Jonah had built a safety net so carefully woven she hadn't even noticed she was standing on it. "He did all this without telling me. He knew you'd argue, knew you'd insist you could handle it alone." Clayton's voice was gentle. "He also knew that pride is easy when you have options but brutal when you don't. He wanted to give you options without making you feel like you'd failed." The kindness of it, the thoughtfulness, the understanding, broke something open inside Marlowe. Jonah hadn't just loved her. He'd known her, every stubborn angle, every fierce independence, every fear she'd never spoken aloud. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Why not just—" Let it keep happening quietly. Because Jonah's plan only covered the immediate crisis. The first year, maybe two. Clayton met her eyes steadily. After that, you'd need something more sustainable. And I think he knew that. I think he trusted that once you'd had time to grieve, time to find your footing, you'd be ready for what comes next. Which is? A real partnership, not charity disguised as help, but actual opportunity. Clayton pulled out another document, a contract, typed and official. I need someone to manage the administrative side of Cloverfield, bookkeeping, supplier relations, scheduling, payroll. My operation has grown beyond what I can handle alone, and I've been running it poorly because I'm better with cattle than computers. Marlowe looked at the contract, then back at Clayton. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a position with competitive salary, benefits and hours that work around your children's school schedule. The office is on the farm, so you wouldn't need to drive all over the county cleaning houses until your body gives out. He paused. Jonah mentioned in his letter that you'd managed accounts for a feed supply company before the children were born, that you were good with numbers and organization. She had been. Before Ilara came along and childcare costs made working impossible, before life had narrowed to diapers and exhaustion and the slow erosion of everything she'd once been capable of doing. I don't know if I remember how, Marlowe said quietly. You remember. Skills like that don't disappear. They just wait. Clayton slid the contract closer. This isn't pity. I genuinely need help and you're qualified. The only unusual thing about this offer is that it exists because your husband saw ahead to what you'd need and made sure someone would be positioned to offer it. Marlowe's hands trembled as she picked up the contract. The salary listed was more than she'd made cleaning houses, more than she'd earned at the feed supply company. Enough to not just survive, but actually live. There's one more thing, Clayton said, his voice dropping lower. The mortgage payments I mentioned, Jonah prepaid 18 months' worth through the trust. But after that, you'd need to take over. With this salary, you could. Comfortably. And if I say no? Then the payments continue as planned, and you keep cleaning houses, and I keep looking for someone to help run my farm. Clayton shrugged. Your choice. No pressure. But I think Jonah hoped you'd be ready for this. Ready to step back into who you were before grief and fear made you forget. The words struck deep. Marlowe realized she had forgotten the woman who'd balanced accounts and negotiated contracts, who'd been confident and capable before loss taught her to make herself smaller. Can I think about it? The question came out barely above a whisper. Take all the time you need. The position won't disappear. Clayton stood, retrieving his hat. But Marlowe, for what it's worth, I think you should do it. Not because Jonah wanted you to, but because you deserve better than breaking your back for people who see you as just the help. You're more than that. You always have been. After he left, Marlowe sat alone with the contract and Jonah's letter, both documents representing the same thing, her husband's unwavering belief that she was strong enough to survive without him, even when she couldn't see it herself. She thought about Ilara asking why someone brought them bread and milk. She thought about Finnick's innocent trust that Mama would figure everything out. She thought about the woman she'd been before and the woman she could become again. That evening, she called the number Clayton had written at the bottom of the contract. I'll take the job, she said when he answered. Not because Jonah arranged it, but because I want my children to see their mother as someone who builds a life, not someone who just survives one. She could hear the smile in Clayton's voice. When can you start? Monday, if that works. Monday's perfect. Welcome to Cloverfield, Marlowe. As she hung up, Marlowe felt something shift inside her chest. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of something else alongside it. Hope, maybe, or purpose, or simply the recognition that loving someone didn't end when they died. It transformed into carrying forward what they'd believed about you. Jonah had believed she was capable of more than survival. It was time to prove him right. Marlowe has accepted Clayton's offer, stepping into a future that Jonah helped build, but that she must now claim as her own. Yet one question remains. What final gift did Jonah leave behind to ensure his family's security long after the quiet trust runs out? 6 months passed, like water flowing downhill, inevitable, steady, transforming the landscape as it went. Marlowe arrived at Cloverfield every morning at 8, her sedan pulling up beside Clayton's truck, with a familiarity that no longer felt strange. She'd converted a spare room in the main barn into an office, where sunlight streamed through high windows, and the scent of hay and livestock drifted in on warm breezes. The work came back to her faster than she'd expected. Spreadsheets, supplier negotiations, payroll management. Her fingers remembered the rhythm of it, her mind clicking into patterns she'd thought were lost. Within weeks, she'd reorganized Clayton's chaotic filing system. Within months, she'd renegotiated contracts that saved the farm thousands of dollars. "You're better at this than I ever was," Clayton said one afternoon, reviewing quarterly reports that actually made sense for the first time in years. "You're better with the animals," Marlowe replied, not looking up from her computer. "Everyone has their strengths." The children adjusted too. Elara and Finnick rode with her to the farm after school, doing homework in the office or exploring the barns under the watchful eyes of the farmhands who'd come to treat them like unofficial mascots. Finnick developed a particular attachment to a calf named Butter, visiting her daily with carrots stolen from the break room. Elara helped catalogue inventory, her precise handwriting filling ledgers with the kind of attention to detail that made Marlowe's chest ache with pride. The bread and milk still appeared at their door each morning, though Marlowe now knew exactly where it came from and why. She'd stopped feeling ashamed of it. Instead, she felt grateful, not just for the food, but for the man who'd loved her enough to see past her pride, and for the friend who'd honored that love by following through. One evening in late autumn, as Marlowe was closing up the office, Clayton knocked on the doorframe. "Got a minute?" She saved her work and turned. "Always. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Actually, something's very right." He held up an envelope. "This came from Jonah's lawyer today, addressed to you." Marlowe's heart stuttered. "After all this time?" Apparently there were instructions, specific timing. Clayton handed her the envelope. "He wanted you to receive this after you'd been working here for 6 months, after you'd proven to yourself that you could do it." Her hands shook as she took it. Jonah's lawyer's return address stared up at her, official and final. "I'll give you privacy," Clayton said, moving toward the door. "No. Stay." Marlowe surprised herself with the request. "Please. Whatever this is, I think you should know too." Clayton nodded and settled into the chair across from her desk. Marlowe opened the envelope carefully, as if it might contain something fragile. Inside was a letter in Jonah's handwriting, along with several legal documents she couldn't immediately process. "My dearest Marlowe, if you're reading this, 6 months have passed since you started working at Cloverfield. I'm hoping that means you found your footing again, that you remember who you were before grief tried to convince you that you were less. I need to tell you something I never said while I was alive, and I'm sorry for that. I was scared. Scared of the genetic heart condition that runs in my family. My father died at 43, his father at 41. I made it to 37, which felt like borrowed time. I saw doctors, got tests. They confirmed what I suspected. My heart was showing the same patterns. They gave me maybe 5 years, probably less. I could have told you, but what would that have accomplished except stealing whatever time we had left and filling it with fear? So I made plans instead. I paid off debts quietly. I saved what I could. I arranged for Clayton to watch over you using the same principle that Richard Calloway taught me, that help given freely creates chains of goodness that outlast any single life. But I also did something else, something I need you to discover now when you're strong enough to receive it, without feeling like I doubted your strength." Marlowe's vision blurred. She paused, wiping her eyes before continuing. "The house you live in. The mortgage payments aren't just delayed, they're finished. I paid off the entire loan 2 years ago, but kept making payments into a separate account managed by the lawyer. That money has been sitting there, growing, waiting for this moment. The documents with this letter transfer ownership of that account to you. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough to cover Elara and Finnick's college educations, enough to repair the roof that's been leaking, enough to give you choices when life presents them. But here's what I really want you to know. This money isn't a gift from a dead husband trying to control your future. It's an investment from a living man who believed in who you'd become after he was gone. Every dollar represents my faith that you'd survive, adapt, and eventually thrive. You don't need this money to prove anything. You've already proven everything that matters by getting up every morning, by caring for our children, by choosing to rebuild rather than surrender. This is just me making sure that when you're ready to dream again, really dream, not just survive, you'll have the foundation to build those dreams on. I love you. I loved you every moment we had together, and I love you still from wherever I am now. Take care of our babies. Take care of yourself. And when you're ready, find happiness again. You have my blessing and my gratitude for the life we shared. Forever yours. Jonah. Marlowe couldn't read the last paragraph aloud. Her voice failed, dissolving into tears that came from somewhere deeper than grief, from the place where loss and love and gratitude tangled together into something that hurt and healed simultaneously. Clayton stood and moved to the window, giving her space while staying present. After a moment, he spoke quietly. He was a good man, one of the best I've ever known. He knew he was dying. Marlowe's words came out broken. All that time he knew, and he just kept loving us, kept planning for us. That's what love does. It doesn't stop when it becomes hard. It finds ways to continue. Marlowe looked at the legal documents through tears. The account balance made her breath catch, more than she'd earned in 3 years of cleaning houses, more than enough to secure futures she'd been too afraid to imagine. "What do I do with this?" she whispered. "You do what Jonah hoped you'd do. You use it wisely. You give your children opportunities. You fix what's broken. You build what's possible." Clayton turned from the window. "And maybe when you're ready, you pass it forward to someone else who needs help standing back up." The words echoed Jonah's letter, Richard Calloway's wisdom, the whole chain of goodness that stretched backward through time and forward into a future Marlowe was only beginning to imagine. That evening, she drove home with her children sleeping in the back seat, the legal documents secure in her purse, and Jonah's final letter pressed against her heart. The bread and milk would still be there tomorrow morning, not because she needed them to survive anymore, but because Clayton understood that some rituals were about connection rather than necessity. She pulled into her driveway as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The house looked different somehow, not just shelter, but home. Not just a place she was trapped by circumstances, but a foundation she could build on. If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support allows us to continue sharing powerful stories about resilience, love, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Thank you for being part of this community. Inside, Marlowe tucked Ilara and Finnick into bed, kissing their foreheads and whispering the same words Jonah used to say, "Tomorrow will be better, because you're in it." Then she sat at the kitchen table with Jonah's letter spread before her and began making lists. The roof repair would come first, practical, necessary. Then a college fund for each child, carefully invested. Maybe some money set aside for emergencies, for opportunities, for the unexpected moments when life required more than determination alone could provide. But she also wrote down something else. Find someone who needs help. Pass it forward. Because that was what Jonah had taught her. That was what Clayton had shown her. That was what Richard Calloway had started decades ago. The understanding that we're all connected by invisible threads of generosity, that helping one person creates ripples that spread further than we can see, that love doesn't end with death if we're brave enough to carry it forward. Marlowe looked at the empty chair across from her, the place where Jonah used to sit with his coffee, and terrible jokes and unwavering belief that people were fundamentally good. "I'll make you proud," she whispered to the silence. "I'll make them proud, and I'll teach our children to do the same." The house creaked and settled around her, familiar and safe. Tomorrow, the bread and milk would appear on her doorstep. Tomorrow, she'd go to work at Cloverfield and continue building the life that Jonah had helped make possible. Tomorrow, she'd be a mother, an employee, a woman learning to carry grief and hope in the same hands without letting either one define her completely. But tonight she was simply grateful for the husband who'd loved her enough to plan for her survival, for the friend who'd honored that love through action, for the children sleeping upstairs who gave her reason to keep choosing tomorrow over yesterday. The story didn't end with Jonah's death. It transformed, the way all stories do when love refuses to let go. It became something larger than any single person, a testament to the truth that we save each other, again and again, through small acts of kindness that echo forward through time long after we're gone. Marlowe folded Jonah's letter carefully and placed it in the box with all his other papers, not to hide it but to preserve it. Someday, when Ilara and Finnick were older, she'd show them what their father had done. She'd teach them about Richard Calloway and Clayton Rowe and the chain of goodness that had kept their family afloat when drowning seemed inevitable. She'd teach them that help isn't weakness, that accepting grace doesn't diminish strength, that we're all just walking each other home, and the best thing we can do is make sure nobody walks alone. Outside, stars appeared in the darkening sky. Inside, Marlowe Hayes, widow, mother, survivor, and now believer in tomorrow, turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, knowing that morning would come, and with it, another chance to honor the man she'd loved and the future he'd made possible. The bread and milk would be there at dawn, and she would be ready.